Today's lesson is about common interview formats and interview questions. There's really two types of interviews in terms of how they structure the questions. There's a structured interview where the interviewer plans out their questions carefully that require brief answers. Then there's unstructured interview where the interviewer prefers more open-ended questions and might change their questions on the fly depending on how you answer and what sparks their curiosity. Sometimes the interviewer will throw hard questions at you just to see how you handle stress, not always to see exactly what your answer is. Here's a few of the most common questions. First off, a common go-to is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? When you're answering this one, try not to be too specific, but imply that you picture yourself working at that company and making a difference there. Another common question is, what is your greatest strength or what is your greatest weakness? When you talk about a weakness, try to find one that's not too negative. Be honest, but also don't put yourself in a bad light. And sometimes they'll throw a very open-ended question to you, like, tell me about yourself. When you're planning out your response to this question, it might help to prepare a list of key phrases you'd like to mention as you describe yourself and your strengths. Another common question is, why did you leave your last job? This might sound kind of obvious, but when you talk about leaving your last job, try not to put either yourself or your past employers in a terribly negative light. If you talk poorly about your past employers, the interviewers might think that that says more about your character than about the employers themselves. So try to sound pretty positive on the whole. There's two questions that you tend to get that sound very similar but mean very different things. Why do you want to work here specifically for us? And also, why should we hire you specifically instead of the other people waiting for an interview today? So when you answer, why do you want to work here? It really helps to do your research on the company first and mention things that stand out about the company that appeal to you. When you talk about why we should hire you, mention things that would make you stand out compared to other people they interview. They'll often ask you what excites you about the career field that you're in and applying for a job in. Why are you passionate about it? Why do you care about it? Another common question is to ask you to elaborate about a particular past experience, accomplishment, or skill you mentioned in your resume. So be prepared to go into more detail about anything you listed there. You'll also often get some variation of a scenario question. What would you do if this tricky scenario happened? And it's a way for them to measure how good you are at problem solving or at dealing with difficult people or at working in a team. For example, my dad once got what would you do if scenario question at a job interview as a computer programmer. And the scenario they provided was really complicated and there was no easy solution. So my dad responded with the idea that he would first ask other people in his work group who had more experience for advice and what they thought about solving the problem. His response actually showed that he had good teamwork and wasn't too proud to ask for help, and he actually got the job. Here's an example of another scenario question you might get. Other questions. What was a challenging situation you faced in your old job, and how did you handle it? And also, they tend to close with some sort of question like, what questions do you have for us, the potential employers? And that's another good way to show that you did your research on the company. If you think of one or two questions that show you know something, you're not clueless about them, and you want to know more. There are some questions that legally potential employers are not allowed to ask, like how old you are, or what religion you belong to, or whether you're married or single, or whether you're planning to have children. If they ask any of these questions, that implies that those are factors that affect your employment, which would be discrimination. That's it for today's notes. Don't forget to turn in a picture of your notes on Schoology.